Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Ready to explore how those good companies actually become great.
Those that achieve some truly impressive and consistent results.
Right, exactly. And to help us unpack this whole thing, and we're diving into good to great today, a pretty fascinating research project, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. And, one of the things that makes this research so compelling is that it doesn't just look at companies that were always at the top of their game.
So not the born champions.
Not at all. It focuses on companies that transform themselves.
So they had like this aha moment.
Yeah, they figure out the secret sauce, turned things around, and made these insights relevant to so many more organizations.
Okay, so potentially even our listeners out there could apply these insights. Now, I know the research actually debunked a few common myths about what really drives success.
It did, like those assumptions about needing a super charismatic leader or having that one amazing technology that would be the magic solution.
So it's not about the flashy stuff.
Not really. It's more about digging into those less glamorous but ultimately more crucial factors.
Things like what?
A disciplined culture, honestly assessing where you're at, and getting the right people on board from the get-go.
So building that strong foundation, not chasing after quick fixes or trends.
Exactly.
Love it. Okay, so let's get specific. Good to great really hinges on this question.
Yeah.
Can good companies actually become great companies? And if so, how?
Right, and it dives into this idea that it's not just about what makes those companies great, but how they actually become great.
I got
A
it.
very deliberate, and the research shows, replicable transition.
Replicable, so there's a pattern there, something we can all learn from, maybe even apply.
Exactly.
And this research wasn't about just cherry-picking those companies that already look successful.
No,
right?
no, not at all. The team had super strict criteria. They looked at companies that outperformed the market consistently by at least 3 times over a long period.
Like how long are we talking?
15 years, so they weren't messing around.
Wow, playing the long game here. Okay, I'm definitely intrigued now. So let's talk about one of the big findings, level 5 leadership.
Level 5 leadership.
And I'm guessing this isn't about those flashy CEOs always in the headlines.
You're right. It's really the opposite. Level 5 leaders have this interesting mix of personal humility, but also a really strong professional will. They're ambitious, but it's not about their own ego. It's about the company's success.
So they're like a quiet force behind the scenes working away. The research actually gives an example of this, right?
It does. Darwin Smith, the CEO of Kimberly-Clark, he led the company to outperform the market significantly. But then when it came time to choose a successor, he picked someone that a lot of people saw as kind of an underdog at the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but that successor and the team that Smith had built, they continued that success and took Kimberly-Clark to even greater heights.
Wow, so it's about building a legacy, not just a personal empire.
Right, building something that lasts.
All right, so we've got these humble, driven leaders in place. What's the next piece of the puzzle?
Well, good to great emphasizes getting the right people in the right roles before even figuring out your exact strategy. They call it first who, then what.
So it's like assembling your A-team before even choosing the game you're going to play.
Exactly. You want a strong team with diverse talents so you can be more adaptable and resilient.
Makes sense. Did the research have any examples of this playing out in the real world?
Oh, for sure. Take Eckerd Corporation and Walgreens. Both drugstore companies, but their approaches to leadership were pretty different.
To listen.
So you've got Jack Eckerd leading Eckerd Corporation, brilliant guy, amazing at market strategy, but he really struggled when it came to building a strong executive team.
Oh, so even with a sharp mind, if you don't have the right people around you.
It can be a problem. And that's actually what contributed to Eckerd Corporation's decline over time.
Wow, okay, good to know. What about Walgreens? What was their approach?
Well, their leader, Cork Walgreen, was laser focused on putting together a top-notch executive team, and that focus really paid off. It became this foundation for Walgreens' success.
So they were set up to adapt and thrive, even when the industry went through changes.
Exactly. It's about creating a culture of leadership, not just relying on one person's brilliance.
Got it. All right, so we've got the right leader, the right people, but we all know that the path to success isn't always smooth sailing. How did those good to great companies handle the inevitable challenges and setbacks?
They practice something called confronting the brutal facts, yet never lose faith. It's this idea of acknowledging the tough reality of your current situation while also believing that you can ultimately succeed.
Whoa, that sounds like a mental balancing act.
It is, holding on to 2 seemingly contradictory ideas at the same time.
Where did this idea even come from?
It's actually rooted in the Stockdale paradox. named for Admiral Jim Stockdale.
Oh, right. He was a prisoner of war in Vietnam.
He was, and he noticed that those prisoners who clung to just blind optimism, well, they often didn't make it.
Makes sense. So it's not about pretending everything's fine. It's about facing reality head on.
Right, but at the same time, keeping that belief that things can get better.
Good to Great uses Fannie Mae as an example, right?
They do. Back in the 80s, Fannie Mae was on the verge of collapse, and their CEO, David Maxwell, he didn't sugarcoat anything. He was completely upfront with his team about the huge challenges they were facing, but he also made sure they believed they could turn it around, and they did.
That's a good reminder that even when things look bleak, honesty paired with belief can be super powerful.
For sure.
All right, so we've got the right leadership, the right people, the right mindset to handle challenges. But how did these good to great companies figure out where to really focus their energy? What was their one big thing?
That's where the Hedgehog Concept comes in. It's about finding that sweet spot where three things intersect. What you're passionate about, what you can truly be the best in the world at, and what drives your economic engine.
Ooh, I love that. Finding your true north, your guiding star that aligns your talents and resources.
Exactly.
But how do you actually discover your hedgehog concept? Is it some big, complicated strategic planning process?
Not necessarily. The book actually uses this analogy of the hedgehog and the fox.
Oh, I remember this.
The fox is clever, knows a lot of things, but the hedgehog, well, it knows one big thing: how to defend itself.
And it wins every time.
Exactly. So the hedgehog concept is about really understanding what you or your company can truly excel at and then focusing on that.
So stripping away all the distractions and getting to the heart of it all.
Right.
Are there any real-world examples of companies that use this hedgehog concept to really transform themselves?
There are. The research contrasts Abbott Laboratories and Upjohn. They were both pharmaceutical companies, but they took different approaches. So Abbott, even after dealing with a major product recall, they used that to redefine their hedgehog concept.
Interesting.
They realized that they could be the best at creating products that would make healthcare more cost-effective, and that focus really led to growth.
So they took a step back and turned it into this opportunity to clarify their mission.
Exactly.
What about Upjohn?
They were a decent company, but they never really nailed down their hedgehog concept. They just didn't get that laser focus on what they could be the best at. And in the end, they ended up getting acquired by another company.
Wow, so even being good isn't always enough.
Sometimes you need to figure out what makes you truly exceptional.
That's a good lesson to remember. So even if things are going okay, it's still worth asking, what can I be the absolute best at? Now, even with all that clarity, the real challenge is building a culture that can execute on that vision.
You got it. And good to great companies, they don't rely on rigid rules or hierarchies.
So it's not about micromanaging everyone.
Nope, it's about building a culture of disciplined people who are driven to take action, and their actions are consistently aligned with the hedgehog concept.
So they're empowered to make smart decisions, but within that framework that the hedgehog concept provides.
Right, it's about finding that balance.
Okay, so we've got these disciplined people guided by their hedgehog concept. But what about technology? It feels like every discussion about business success these days has to touch on the latest tech trends. What's the good to great take on all that?
Well, it challenges that idea that technology is what makes or breaks a company.
Oh, so it's not some magic bullet.
Nope. The companies that went from good to great, they didn't see technology that way. They saw it as an accelerator, something to help them move faster.
So you're not chasing after the newest shiny object. You're figuring out how technology can boost what you're already good at.
Right. The book uses Walgreens as an example. When the internet boom happened, some people criticized them for being slow to embrace it.
Yeah, everyone was jumping on the bandwagon.
They were. But Walgreens, they took their time and thought carefully about how online services could actually improve their existing focus on customer experience and convenience.
So they didn't let the technology dictate their strategy. They made it serve their purpose.
And it paid off. Their online platform eventually became just as sophisticated as those pure online companies. Meanwhile, some of those online companies that everyone thought were going to take over, well, they flamed out, proving that technology alone wasn't enough.
So it's a good reminder that technology should be a tool that you use strategically.
Not something that dictates your every move.
Okay, I'm seeing how all of this fits together. We've got the level 5 leadership, the right people, that mindset of honesty and faith, a clear hedgehog concept to guide everything, a culture of discipline and creativity and using technology strategically. It really does feel like a recipe for success. But how does all this translate into concrete results? Good to Great talks about this idea of the flywheel effect, right?
Yes, it does. Think of it like a giant, heavy flywheel. It takes a lot of effort to get it moving at first, but once it starts spinning, each push adds more momentum.
So you're not looking for overnight miracles, you're putting in consistent effort over time.
Right, like compound interest, but for success. Each small win pushes the flywheel a little faster until it reaches this point where the momentum is almost unstoppable.
And what about those CEOs who led these transformations? Did they see themselves as like the driving force behind all this?
Interestingly, no, not really. They saw their role more as building a system, a culture that could keep that flywheel spinning even after they were gone.
So it's not about the heroic leader. It's about setting up a system that can sustain itself.
Exactly. And on the flip side, those comparison companies, the ones that didn't make that jump to greatness, they often fell into this pattern that the researchers called the doom loop.
What's that?
Well, it's basically constantly jumping from one program to another, always changing direction, so they never built up any real momentum.
Like pushing the flywheel back and forth, never letting it really gain speed.
Exactly. It just emphasizes the importance of sticking to your hedgehog concept.
This has been incredibly insightful, but before we go any further, I have one more question.
Go ahead.
We've talked about how companies go from good to great, but what happens after they reach greatness? How do they stay there?
That's a great question. And it actually takes us back to some of Jim Collins' earlier work. Remember, built to last.
Of course. It looked at all those truly enduring great companies.
Right, the ones that have thrived for decades, sometimes even generations. And guess what? The research shows that those enduring great companies, they embody a lot of the same concepts we've been talking about right from the beginning.
Wow, so it's like they're born with a flywheel that's already in motion?
Pretty much. They're guided by these core principles that allow them to navigate change and keep performing at a high level.
So it's not just about becoming great, it's about staying great.
Exactly. But how do they do that? How do they hold on to their essence while still adapting to the world around them? Well, it's about finding this balance, preserving their core values, while also stimulating progress.
Can you give us an example of a company that really embodies this?
Sure. Think about Walt Disney. They started with simple cartoons, right? But they evolved, went on to create those full-length animated movies, then television, and then theme parks.
What a diverse range of businesses. But through all of that, what stayed the same?
Their core values, their belief in imagination, their attention to detail, their rejection of cynicism, and their dedication to that Disney magic.
So they were pushing boundaries, but also staying true to who they were.
That's the idea. And this isn't just for big companies. This is something we can all apply to our own lives, our careers, our creative pursuits.
So we can all benefit from this idea of preserve the core, stimulate progress.
Absolutely.
How can we even begin to do that?
Well, it starts with figuring out what our own core values are, those fundamental things that drive us. And then we need to think about how we can hold on to those values while also being open to new ideas, challenges, and ways of doing things.
It's like a dance, isn't it? Finding that balance between stability and change.
It is, and it's a dance worth learning.
This has been such a fascinating journey. Good to Great has given us so much to think about. But before we move on, I have one final question.
Okay, what's on your mind?
Think about that idea of preserve the core, stimulate progress, but now apply it to your own personal life. What are those core values that you want to hold on to no matter what?
I like where you're going with this.
And at the same time, what are those areas where you want to grow, to evolve, to push yourself further?
It's a challenge.
It is, but it's one that's worth taking on.
For sure.
Keep those mental wheels turning. You never know what breakthroughs you might discover. We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive, but until then, see how you can apply these insights from good to great to your own journey towards, well, greatness.
Makes you think about how often we actually stop and examine those fundamental parts of ourselves, those values that really define who we are, and how we can stay true to those while still growing and changing. It's a pretty powerful concept.
It is. It's like figuring out what those constants in our lives should be, those things that are truly fundamental to who we are, but also embracing the need to change and adapt as the world around us changes. Speaking of adapting, let's go back to that flywheel effect for a minute. We talked about how it takes that sustained effort to build momentum, but good to great also digs into what can actually cause that momentum to stall out. Like, what are some of those common pitfalls that can send companies into that doom loop?
One of the big ones is this tendency to rely on those big programs or initiatives, looking for that quick fix. It's like they're trying to force that flywheel to spin faster with one massive push instead of those consistent efforts that we were talking about.
That classic desire for a shortcut to success. But Good to Great really emphasizes that true transformation is a marathon. It's not about those flashy initiatives, those overnight revolutions, those Good to Great companies. They were all about building a system, a culture that could sustain success over the long haul. I can see how trying to force things too quickly, well, it could actually backfire.
Exactly. It's about laying that foundation, brick by brick, decision by decision, not chasing those quick wins that often don't last. And this all ties back to level 5 leadership, doesn't it? Those leaders weren't about building a cult of personality. They weren't relying on charisma to drive change. They were focused on building a team, a system that could thrive long after they were gone.
So it's about empowering others, creating a framework where everyone can contribute, where they feel a sense of ownership.
Exactly. Fostering an environment where people feel valued, where they feel challenged and inspired to work together toward that shared goal. You know, it's interesting. Some of those good to great companies, they actually struggled to articulate exactly why they were so successful. They couldn't point to one specific strategy or one defining moment. It was more like this collective effort, a gradual accumulation of all those small wins guided by their hedgehog concept.
It's like they were so focused on just doing the right things, on building that momentum, that they didn't even realize how remarkable their transformation was until they looked back. Do you think that's part of it, being so in the moment, so committed to the journey, that the results kind of sneak up on you?
I think you might be onto something there. I think when you're truly present in the moment, focused on taking those consistent actions, you're not so distracted by doubts or that need for instant gratification. It's about trusting the process, believing that those small steps, they'll eventually lead to something amazing.
Okay, so we've talked about building that momentum, pushing the flywheel, but at some point, that consistent effort leads to a breakthrough, right?
Yeah.
How did those good to great companies handle those moments of transition?
It's interesting. These breakthroughs, they weren't always marked by some big event, some huge innovation. It was more like a tipping point, you know, like all those efforts finally coming together to create this significant shift.
So it's less about a sudden aha moment and more about that gradual buildup, a critical mass that reaches a tipping point.
Right, like a snowball rolling downhill, picking up more and more snow as it goes until it becomes this unstoppable force. The book talks about Circuit City, the electronics retailer. Their transformation was more than a decade in the making. It started with rebuilding their executive team, being really honest about the challenges they were up against, and then experimenting with different retail concepts.
So they didn't just magically stumble onto the perfect formula?
Not at all. It was a process, trial and error, learning, adapting, but all while staying true to those core values and their understanding of their hedgehog concept. It sounds like embracing those failures, seeing them as opportunities to learn, is a big part of achieving those breakthroughs.
It is. It's about being willing to experiment, to make mistakes, but learning from them and then continuing to improve. Those good to great companies didn't let those setbacks define them. They used those setbacks to propel themselves forward.
They did.
That resilience, that adaptability seems like such a crucial ingredient for success.
It is, and it connects back to that idea of confronting those brutal facts, but still maintaining faith.
You're right. It's about being honest about where you are, even if it's not pretty, while still believing in your ability to get to where you want to be.
It's about having that grit, that determination. The Circuit City story is a great example of that. When they first launched their new concept store, it wasn't an instant hit. It took time, refining their approach, building that momentum in the market. But they were patient, they were disciplined, and they stuck to their vision. And all of that led to some pretty incredible growth.
It's a reminder that those breakthroughs, they often come after a period of just steady, sometimes even frustrating effort. That snowball effect we were talking about, you've got to keep rolling it, keep putting in the work, even when you can't see the finish line.
And it's in those moments, those times when you're tempted to give up, that your character really gets tested. And the good to great companies, those leaders, they showed that ability to stay the course, to trust the process, even when they didn't see immediate results. It's having faith in the power of that consistent effort, knowing that those small wins, they will add up to something amazing.
That brings up an interesting point that runs through the whole book, the role of luck. Some people might say that those companies were just lucky, that they were in the right place at the right time. But the research doesn't really support that, does it?
It doesn't. The researchers, They were looking for companies that outperform their industries, not just the overall market. They wanted to find those companies that succeeded even when external factors weren't working in their favor.
So it's less about just being lucky and more about making your own luck through smart decisions, discipline, and that willingness to adapt and learn.
Exactly. The good to great companies, they didn't spend time worrying about luck. They focused on what they could control. Their people, their culture, their hedgehog concept. They didn't waste energy trying to predict the future or getting bogged down by things outside their control.
So it's about taking ownership, focusing on what you can influence. Like that saying, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity.
I like that. And the good to great companies, they were prepared. They had done the work. They had built that strong foundation. And when the opportunity presented itself, they were ready.
It's not about waiting for luck to strike. It's about being ready for it when it does.
Exactly. Putting yourself in a position to succeed, being open to possibilities.
This is also inspiring. It's like we're being given this roadmap to success, not just for businesses, but for individuals too. But I have to admit, I'm curious about those companies that didn't make that jump, those that stayed stuck in that doom loop. What can we learn from them? What held them back?
It's a good question, and the research really delves into that. One of the most common things in those comparison companies was a lack of disciplined thinking. They tended to be reactive, jumping on the latest trends, without a clear understanding of their hedgehog concept or that commitment to building a consistent culture.
So they lack that clear sense of direction, that compass, to help them navigate all the constant changes in the business world.
Yeah, they were always chasing the next shiny object, hoping for a quick solution, but they never really understood their core strengths, their potential.
It's like trying to win the lottery. Instead of investing in a solid financial plan, they were looking for shortcuts instead of that sustainable long-term success. And as we've seen from the good to great companies, real success is rarely about overnight transformations. It's about making smart choices, consistent action, and building a supportive culture.
You nailed it. Having a clear vision, a strong foundation, and that commitment to continuous improvement. It's about having the courage to say no to things that don't fit, even if they seem tempting in the moment. Sticking to your hedgehog concept, even when everything around you seems to be pulling you in different directions.
I think it all boils down to self-awareness, not just for companies, but for individuals too. Do we really understand our strengths, our passions, our own personal hedgehog concept? Or are we getting swept up in trends and what other people expect of us?
That's a great point. It's so easy to get distracted, to compare ourselves to others, chasing what's trendy at the moment. But real success, in business and in life, often comes from tuning all that out and figuring out what truly matters to us.
It's about defining our own version of success, our own hedgehog concept, and then building a life that reflects that. This has been such a great conversation. We've covered so much, from leadership and strategy to culture and technology, even those philosophical underpinnings of success. I'm already starting to see the world a bit differently.
Me too. It feels like we've been given this new framework for understanding how success works. And what's really cool is that it's not just about achieving some far-off goal. It's about the journey itself. It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves.
This deep dive has been so insightful and inspiring. Before we wrap up this part, though, I have one last question that's been on my mind. Good to great focuses on that transition from good to great. But what about companies or organizations that start out great? How do they maintain that level of performance over time? How do they avoid becoming complacent or slipping into that doom loop?
That's a fascinating question. And, it's something that Jim Collins and his team actually explored in some of their later research. And what they found was that a lot of those same principles that applied to businesses, they also held true for nonprofits, for schools, even for social movements.
So these ideas about low-five leadership, the hedgehog concept, the flywheel effect, they're not just limited to the corporate world.
Exactly. They go beyond industries. They're about human nature, about how we organize ourselves, about setting goals, about achieving remarkable things.
That's really empowering. It means that we can all use these insights from good to great to make a positive impact, whether we're leading a team, building a business, or just trying to make a difference.
It's about finding our own unique potential and then creating a life that aligns with that vision.
This has been such a thought-provoking conversation. Before we move on to our final insights, I just have one more question that's been swirling around in my head.
Okay, I'm all ears.
We've talked a lot about the importance of discipline, focusing on that hedgehog concept. But how do we balance all that with the need to be innovative and creative? How do we make sure we don't become so rigid that we miss out on new opportunities or we can't adapt?
That's a great question. And it's something that a lot of leaders and just people in general struggle with. It's about finding that balance between staying true to yourself, to your core, but also embracing change.
Good cut touches on this, right? It talks about building a culture that encourages both discipline and creativity.
Exactly. You want to create an environment where people feel like they can experiment, challenge the status quo, come up with new ideas. But then you also need a way to evaluate those ideas to make sure they fit with the overall goals, that hedgehog concept.
So you're not just throwing ideas at the wall and seeing what sticks.
So it's about having that structure in place, a system. The book actually gives the example of 3M, the company famous for being innovative. They have this rule that employees should spend 15% of their time on personal projects, even if those projects have nothing to do with their regular work. And that freedom to explore, well, it's led to some of their biggest successes.
That's a great example. It's really cool to see a company encourage that kind of creative freedom.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there's still that underlying structure to make sure that those explorations are still aligned with the company's overall goals.
Exactly. That freedom is there, but it's within a framework. 3M, they also have a really thorough process for evaluating new ideas to make sure that those ideas are in line with their overall strategy and their hedgehog concept.
So it's not just about coming up with crazy ideas. It's about filtering and developing them, turning them into something tangible.
Right.
It sounds like 3M has created this really powerful engine for innovation. Do you think this is something that individuals can apply in their own lives?
Absolutely. We can all benefit from creating that kind of space for ourselves, a space where we can experiment, where we can push our own creative limits. But we also need to have that inner guide, our own personal hedgehog concept, to make sure we're moving in the right direction.
This has been such a great conversation. We've covered so much. And I'm already starting to see these ideas from good to great playing out all around me, in businesses, organizations, even in my own life.
Me too. It's like we've been given this new way of looking at the world.
I'm starting to think about my own flywheel now. Those small, consistent actions I can take to get closer to my goals. What about you? What are you taking away from this? What's really resonating with you? For me, it's that reminder that success isn't a destination, it's a journey. It's about continually learning, adapting, evolving, but staying true to those core values, our hedgehog concept. It's about that balancing act of preserving the core while stimulating progress, both in our work and in our personal lives.
That's a great way to put it, finding that sweet spot between stability and growth.
I'm starting to see those flywheels spinning everywhere now.
I know, right?
In companies, organizations, even in my own life.
Me too! It's like we've been given this new framework for understanding how success happens, how transformation takes place. And the best part is that it's not just about achieving some far-off goal. It's about the journey itself. It's about becoming the best versions of ourselves.
This deep dive has been so insightful and inspiring. But before we wrap up this episode, I have one final thought-provoking question for you to ponder. One that builds on everything we've talked about.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine you're creating a good to great blueprint for your own life. What would be the key elements? What would be your hedgehog concept? What kind of flywheel would you build? And what would you do to keep it spinning year after year?
Wow, that's a great question.
It's a challenge, but it's one that's worth embracing.
Absolutely. It's a challenge that can lead to a life of meaning, purpose, and yes, even greatness.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
It really encourages you to think deeply, doesn't it? Taking those principles we've been unpacking, all these insights from good to great, and actually applying them to our own lives. It's about understanding what we're truly passionate about, what we excel at, and how to build momentum toward a life that's both fulfilling and impactful.
Absolutely. It's almost like we're taking these concepts from the business world and using them as a blueprint for personal growth. We become the CEOs of our own lives, right?
Yeah.
Making those strategic decisions, setting goals, and building that internal culture of discipline and creativity that we've been talking about.
I love that. We're in the driver's seat, making choices that shape our own journeys. And, one of the things that really resonated with me from good to great was the emphasis on making those tough decisions. Having the discipline to say no to opportunities that might seem tempting, but don't actually fit with our hedgehog concept.
So recognizing that not all opportunities are created equal, sometimes that no is actually the most powerful decision we can make.
Exactly. It's about understanding that sometimes saying yes to everything can actually dilute our energy and take us further away from what really matters. And the research actually found that the companies that didn't make that leap, they often struggled with this. They'd spread themselves too thin, chasing after everything, and ultimately losing focus on what was truly important.
It's like that saying, jack of all trades, master of none, right? It's a good reminder that we need to be selective, focus our energy on those areas where we can actually make a real difference, where we can leverage our strengths and passions. And speaking of passion, Good to Great doesn't shy away from that, does it? Yeah. It's not just about cold, hard strategy. It acknowledges the importance of passion as a driving force.
Oh, absolutely. The research really highlighted the importance of passion, especially when it comes to figuring out our hedgehog concept. It's about finding that sweet spot where what we're good at and what we can be the best at in the world intersects with what truly lights us up, what we're passionate about.
They even used the example of Philip Morris, the tobacco company. Now, before anyone jumps to conclusions, we're not endorsing their products, but the research showed that the people leading Philip Morris, they were incredibly passionate about their business. And even though it was a controversial industry, that passion, combined with a clear vision and disciplined approach, fueled their success.
It's a great example of how powerful passion can be as a motivator when it's channeled in the right way. It can turn work into something you're excited to do every day. It becomes a calling, not just a job.
This brings us back to that question we posed earlier. If you were creating a good to great blueprint for your own life, what would it look like? What would be the key elements? As we wrap up our deep dive, what are some of those key takeaways that you're finding yourself reflecting on?
For me, it's that reminder that greatness in business and in life is a process, not a destination. It's about building that flywheel step by step, day by day. It's about having the discipline to stay focused, the courage to be honest with ourselves, and the passion to keep going, even when things get tough.
I love that. It's about embracing the journey, not just chasing after some finish line. And for me, it's that realization that we all have that potential for greatness within us. It's not about some magical talent or luck. It's about making choices, cultivating discipline and creativity, and finding that one thing, our hedgehog concept, that we can really pour ourselves into. It's a powerful message.
It is. It's empowering. We're not just passive passengers in our own lives. We have the ability to create something meaningful, something that leaves a positive impact. And that, I think, is what Good to Great is all about.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Good to Great, I want to encourage everyone listening to take these insights and see how they can apply them to your own life, your own work, your own journey. What is your hedgehog concept? What kind of flywheel are you building? What small, consistent actions can you take starting today to get that flywheel spinning? Keep those wheels turning, and remember, greatness is within your reach.
It's a journey worth taking.
Until next time, keep diving deep.